Welcome back to my channel. Today I'm making one of my all-time favorite dishes. It's a dish that I could eat all year round, and that is the beef noodle soup, aka Vietnamese pho. So let's begin. We're gonna start off by cleaning our beef bones. So what we have here is a large stock pot, which we can boil down the impurities in the bones. So we're gonna start off by using 2.5 kilos of beef ribs or beef bones. You can get your local butcher to cut them down for you if you don't have a bone saw. Followed by 1.5 kilos of marrow-rich bones. This will build a deeper fatty flavor for the broth. Next will be our chuck roast with our bone. And lastly, the end part of our shin, which includes the tendon. Now we're gonna fill up our stock pot of cold water. Now we're gonna get it to a rolling boil for about 5 minutes, just so it can boil out any impurities in the bones. While that's boiling away, we'll get started with our aromatics. So we're gonna start off by using 20 grams of coriander seeds, half a cinnamon stick, 1.5 Star Anise, and 1 cardamom pod. For me, I don't use a lot of aromatics from the very start. It's a lot easier to add aromatics into the stock rather than trying to dilute it once it gets too strong. So in a cold pan, we're gonna start to add all our aromatics. Lightly toast them until they slightly change in color and they become fragrant. Once they are toasted, set it aside in a bowl. Next, we're gonna char up 1 onion, which we have peeled and halved, as well as 1 large knob of ginger. Take them out when they look like this. After about 5 minutes on a rolling boil, you should start to see your water like this. You can see the amount of scum coming off the bones and the impurities. This is not what you want in the pho broth, so we're gonna remove all the liquid out of this, give it a clean, and then we will start with some fresh water. Wash the bones with running water to clean off any scum and impurities off the surface of the bones. Add in about 5 or 6 liters of water, depending on the size of your stock pot. I'm using a 12-liter stock pot, so it does fit about 6 liters with the amount of bones I'm using. Next, we'll go in our aromatics, our 2 charred ginger, our halved onion, and all our toasted spices. Next, we'll add in about 25 grams of rock sugar, followed by 1/4 cup of fish sauce, followed by a good pinch of salt. This is optional, you can add in a little bit of MSG. Now I'm gonna let this simmer away for about 12 hours. A very crucial note is to not let it simmer over. You don't want the stock to become cloudy, and the only way to avoid this is by using a very low flame when simmering for a long time. From time to time, check on your broth to see if any scum has built up over the top layer of your broth, and if it has, just grab a ladle and scoop it out. After the 8-hour mark, this is my first taste test of the broth. This is where I need to see if I need any more aromatics or seasoning to the broth. It's currently the next day and I've let the broth simmer for about 18 hours. Throughout the night I have checked for the seasoning levels. It did require a little bit more salt. All we need to do now is remove the bones and get it ready for one last simmer. You can see all the meat and tendons have melted straight off the bone. All the flavor has extracted into the broth. All the bones have been extracted from the broth, so we've got a new pot and a strainer, so we'll just strain out all the little bits and pieces left over in our pot. We have some Vietnamese beef balls. These can be sourced from some Vietnamese butchers or your local Asian grocery stores. So what we're gonna do is cut them into quarters and add into our stock during our last simmer. We'll add them to our stock and bring it up to a simmer again. While that's simmering away, we'll get a pot full of water so we can blanch our rice noodles and bean sprouts. For our garnishes, we're gonna start off by using 1 medium onion that we're gonna finely slice, followed by the green part of our spring onion. For our side dish, we're going to use 1 handful of bean sprouts that we're going to blanch a bit later. a handful of Thai basil, a small handful of coriander that we're just going to roughly pull apart, 2 bird's eye chilies. And lastly, 1 lime. Place this here. And now the last step, the beef. With pho, it's generally served with raw beef. I'm using topside today as this is the cut typically used in the cuisine. We're gonna start off by patting it dry with some paper towels. Next, we're gonna slice it in half here. You wanna slice the beef as thin as possible so when you pour the stock over the beef, it cooks it beautifully. If a certain part of the beef you slice is too thick, just simply use the back end of the knife to press it out. That is exactly how you want it. Lastly, I pulled out the chuck steak from the broth last night and let it refrigerate overnight. So we're just going to cut across the grain. Now we'll blanch the noodles and get everything assembled. Now that the water's boiling, we'll first blanch the bean sprouts. Cook it for about 30 seconds to a minute, depending on how cooked you want your bean sprouts. Today I'm using fresh noodles for our pho. You can use the dried noodles, just make sure you soak them for about 30 to 45 minutes before you cook them. With fresh noodles, they should only take about 30 seconds to a minute as well. I'm using about a handful per serving. After about a minute, in goes our noodles, our bean sprouts, our cooked chuck steak from before, and finally, our thinly sliced beef. Lastly, we'll go our broth. Garnish it with some onion and some spring onion. And lastly, Hoisin Sauce and Sriracha. And there we have it, Vietnamese pho. Time for the taste test.